I need to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. You have probably sat through hundreds of masses and Sunday services. You have heard dozens of sermons about giving, about tithing, about trusting God, about the dangers of materialism. But there is a layer of Solomon's financial wisdom that is almost never, and when I say almost never, I mean it seriously, taught from any pulpit in the Philippines, not in the Catholic Church, not in the evangelical church, not in the born again communities, not in the charismatic prayer groups, not because the pastors and priests are dishonest, but because the church across generations here separated the spiritual from the economic. It taught that speaking deeply about money is materialism, that practical financial questions belong to the secular world, and that the Christian's job is to trust, to tithe, and to wait. The result, families who love God with everything they have, who serve faithfully every week, who give without fail, who arrive at 50 years old with no savings, no assets, no source of income beyond the salary that arrives every 15th and 30th. Not because God failed, but because nobody ever taught them what Solomon wrote. Solomon was not just the wisest man in history, he was the wealthiest. And he recorded, with a precision that still astonishes, financial principles that any modern economist would recognize as valid. They are just written in language that is 3,000 years old, and very few people have read them with eyes of practical application. Today, I am going to open 5 of those principles, not the most famous ones, the ones buried in the folds of the text, in the subtext of Proverbs, in the verses that most people read and walked past without stopping. 5 financial secrets of Solomon that no pastor in the Philippines is teaching, not out of bad intention, but because the church, in general, has never stopped long enough to teach them. Stay until the end, because the 5th secret is the one that most contradicts what you were probably taught to believe about faith and money. Before we go into the 5 secrets, I need to establish something that will change the way you read this book. Solomon did not write theory. He wrote from the experience of a man who administered an entire kingdom, who conducted business with the Queen of Sheba, who exported cedar from Lebanon and imported gold from Ophir. When Solomon speaks about money, it is not a sermon, it is a field report. And that is exactly why what he wrote has a different quality than any modern finance course, because it has survived 3,000 years of crises, empires, wars, inflations, and economic revolutions, and it is still true. Write in the comments. I want to see what Solomon actually wrote, because many people have read the Bible their whole lives and never read Solomon with this lens. The first secret, Solomon knew that assets and liabilities are spiritual categories, not just financial ones. Proverbs 13:22. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. Most people read that verse as a promise of future prosperity, and it is. But there is a practical instruction embedded in it that almost nobody notices. Leaves an inheritance for their children's children, not for the children, for the children's children. Solomon is describing a planning horizon that goes beyond one's own life and beyond the life of the children. He is talking about building intergenerational wealth. He is saying that the wise person thinks about assets that produce beyond themselves. This is the opposite of what consumer culture teaches. And it is also the opposite of what a lot of prosperity gospel preaching teaches, that the goal of blessing is your comfort right now. Solomon was not thinking about comfort right now. He was thinking about legacy that lasts for generations. Here in the Philippines, this hits in a very specific way. Filipino families are among the most sacrificial in the world. OFW parents work abroad for years, missing birthdays, missing graduations, missing the small moments so that the family at home can survive. But surviving is not the same as building. The OFW who sends every peso home and returns with nothing saved has sacrificed years of presents for our remittance that was consumed. The family that receives the money and spends it on immediate needs without putting any portion into something that will produce more money has traded years of family separation for maintenance, not momentum. That is not a criticism. That is a pattern, and it is exactly the pattern that Solomon's principle interrupts. According to data from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, only around 30% of OFW remittances are directed towards savings or investment. 70% goes to household consumption. Solomon did not say to be rich. He said to leave an inheritance for your children's children. The difference is the horizon. And the long horizon changes everything. The instruction map, first step, understand the difference in simple terms. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out. Sit down this week and write a list of everything you own and honestly classify each one. Second step, before every major purchase, ask yourself, in 5 years, will this be worth more or less than what I am paying for it today? If less, it is a liability. If more, or if it will generate income, it may be an asset. Third step, define a goal of one new asset per year. It does not need to be large, a PIRA account contribution, a small piece of land in a growing municipality, a rental room in your own home. The habit matters more than the amount. Fourth step, teach the difference to your children before the consumer market teaches them its version. The intergenerational inheritance of Proverbs 13:22 does not begin with money, it begins with mindset. The child who learns to distinguish asset from liability before they turn 20 starts adult life with decades of advantage. Fifth step, do not wait to have much before you start. Stock market platforms like COL Financial, First Metrosec, and BDO Nomura allow you to start investing in Philippine equities with as little as 5,000 pesos. The point of entry is irrelevant. The habit of planting is what matters. The second secret, Solomon understood the power of calculated risk, and the church turned it into fear. Ecclesiastes 11:1. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days, you may receive a return. And verse 2, invest in 7 ventures. Yes, in 8, you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. And verse 4, whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. Solomon is describing, with precision, the behavior of the paralyzed investor. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever waits for perfect conditions will never act. Whoever waits for certainty before sowing will die with the seed still in their hands. And then comes verse 6. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Sow in the morning, sow in the evening, not because you know which one will succeed, but because you don't know, and therefore you sow at multiple times and on multiple soils. That is diversification. That is risk management. That is what any modern financial advisor would tell you is the foundation of a sound investment strategy. And Solomon wrote it 3,000 years before the Philippine Stock Exchange existed. What did the church do with this principle? In many cases, it turned prudence into paralysis. It taught that waiting on God means not acting until you have absolute certainty. That sowing without guarantee is a lack of faith in the provider. But Solomon, the man God considered the wisest, says exactly the opposite. Sow without knowing which one will succeed. Act despite the risk. Distribute because uncertainty is real and will not disappear. Biblical faith is not the absence of risk. Biblical faith is acting despite the risk with wisdom and without recklessness. Here in the Philippines, I see this pattern constantly. Families who have been saying they will start investing when the right moment comes for 5, 10, 15 years, when the economy stabilizes, when the kids finish school, when there is more left over after the remittance, when they understand it better, those conditions never all arrive at the same time. Whoever watches the wind does not plant. The instruction map, first step. Understand that zero risk does not exist. Money sitting in a traditional savings account loses purchasing power to inflation every year. Property that sits idle generates no return. The only way to have no risk is to have nothing, and having nothing is also a risk. Second step, start learning the basics of low-risk Philippine investment. PIRA accounts. Treasury bills through the Bureau of Treasury, UITF, Unit Investment Trust Funds, available at most Philippine banks with minimums as low as 5,000 pesos. These are accessible, regulated, and historically outperform inflation over the long term. Third step, sow with what you have today, not with what will be left after everything else, with what you have today. Even if it is 500 pesos per month, the habit built with little sustains the discipline when the volume grows. Fourth step, diversify between at least two different things from the beginning. Not because you will lose on one, but because Solomon said, invest in 7, yes, in 8. Wisdom distributes. Fifth step, do not watch the wind. Do not wait for the ideal interest rate, the perfect market moment, political stability, or an election result. Those conditions never arrive together. So now, adjust later. The third secret. Solomon knew that debt is slavery and that there is a difference between good debt and bad debt. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. Slavery. That is not a soft metaphor. That is the precise description of what consumer debt does. It turns the borrower into a slave of the lender, obligated to deliver a portion of their income month after month, year after year, sometimes for things they can no longer remember buying. And in the Philippines, where the informal lending industry, the 5-6 system, the credit card trap, and the loan shark culture are deeply embedded in communities across the country. This verse is not historical, it is present tense. The 5-6 system, where a borrower receives 500 pesos and repays 600 in a short period, representing an effective annual interest rate of over 700%, according to BSP estimates, is one of the most predatory debt instruments operating in any country in the world, and it operates inside barangays, inside communities, inside the networks of trust that Filipinos value most. That is not credit. That is the most expensive form of slavery that exists. But Solomon was not against financial instruments as such. He was against slavery without purpose. There is a fundamental difference between debt that consumes, credit for goods that depreciate, experiences that leave no asset, things that are used before they are paid off. This creates slavery with no return, and debt that produces a mortgage on a property that appreciates and generates rental income, a loan for working capital in a business with real margin, an investment in education that increases earning capacity. This creates temporary slavery in exchange for an asset that exceeds the cost of the debt. Solomon was not against instruments. He was against purposeless bondage. In Quezon City, a man named Ramon had 5 different loans running simultaneously: 2 credit cards, a salary loan from SS, a personal loan from a coworker, and a 5-6 arrangement from a neighborhood lender. Together, they consumed more than 40% of his monthly income. He mapped it all out on one sheet of paper. The total interest he was paying every month was more than the amount he was actually reducing from his principal. He was running to stand still. He applied the avalanche method, attacking the highest interest debt first while paying minimums on the rest. The 5-6 arrangement went first, then the credit card, then the SSS loan. In 26 months, he had eliminated 4 of the 5 debts. The monthly amount that had been going to lenders was redirected. A portion to savings, a portion to a small sari-sari store. He and his wife had been planning for 3 years. The same income, no raise, no new job, just the removal of the slavery that had been consuming 40% of what he earned. The instruction map, first step, list every debt you currently have. For each one, write, what did I buy with this? Does that thing still exist? Is it worth more or less than what I still owe? Second step, eliminate consumer debt with the highest interest rate first. The 5-6 system, credit card revolving balance, and informal personal loans are the most expensive instruments in the Philippine financial system. No legal investment outperforms those costs. Eliminating that debt is the highest return investment you can make. Third step, before any new debt, ask, at the end of the repayment period, will what I acquired be worth more or less than the total I will have paid? If less, it is consumer debt. If more, or if it generates income greater than the cost of the debt, it may be productive debt. Fourth step, never borrow from 5 or 6 lenders for any reason. The effective interest rate makes it mathematically impossible to get ahead. If you are currently in a 5-6 arrangement, prioritize eliminating it above every other financial goal. Fifth step, teach this distinction to your children before the informal lending industry teaches them its version. The young person who understands the difference between productive and consumer debt before they turn 18 enters adult life with enormous protection against the trap that has kept generations of Filipino families in cycles of borrowing they cannot escape. The fourth secret, Solomon understood that fair pricing is a spiritual principle, not a secular compromise. Proverbs 11:1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. The dishonest scale. In the context of the ancient market, the scale was the instrument of every commercial transaction. Whoever manipulated the weight, sold less than they charged for, or bought more than they paid for, was defrauding the other party. And Solomon says that is detestable to God. The accurate weight, the exact, just, fair amount, finds favor with him. Think about what this means practically. When you charge what your service is genuinely worth, not less out of false humility, not more out of greed, you are pleasing God. When you deliver exactly what you promised, not less out of laziness, not more out of empty showmanship, you are pleasing God. Commercial integrity is not just business ethics, it is an act of worship. And here is the secret that no pastor in the Philippines ever seems to teach clearly. Many Filipino Christians charge significantly below the real value of their services because they believe that is humility, that charging market rate is greed, that the Christian should always give a discount because we are brothers and sisters. I understand where that comes from. Filipino culture values generosity. The bayanihan spirit is real and beautiful. Giving to your community is part of who we are as a people, but Proverbs 11:1 says the accurate weight finds favor with God, not the reduced weight out of false piety. The accurate weight, charging below cost, is not generosity. It is poor stewardship. You are delivering a service without receiving what it is worth, which means you will need to compensate that loss somewhere else. You will grow to resent the client, and you will depreciate your own work and your own dignity. Charging fairly for the real value of what you deliver is honoring the scale that God approves. There are Filipino freelancers on international platforms charging a fraction of what their counterparts from other countries charge for the same quality of work, simply because somewhere they were taught that asking for the right price is incompatible with being humble. Humility is not underpricing yourself. Humility is doing excellent work and charging what that excellence is genuinely worth. The instruction map, first step, research what the market pays for the service or product you deliver. For freelancers, check Upwork, Fiverr, online jobs at the PH. For local services, check what competitors in your city charge. Know the market price before setting yours. Second step, calculate the real cost of what you deliver: time, materials, tools, transportation, energy, mental load. Many who charge too little have never actually calculated how much the service costs them to deliver. Third step, define a fair margin, not extortive, not negligible. A margin that sustains the business, compensates the work adequately, and allows for reinvestment. Fourth step, communicate the price clearly before delivering. The price agreed in advance is the accurate scale. Surprise after delivery is a dishonest scale, even if it is unintentional. Fifth step, do not negotiate against yourself. Do not offer a discount before the client asks for one. Do not apologize for your price before being questioned. Present the value with confidence because the accurate weight requires no apology. The fifth secret, Solomon knew that prosperity without character seeds destruction, and this is the secret that makes people most uncomfortable. Proverbs 10:22. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it. Read that verse again slowly. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil. What Solomon is saying is not just that God blesses financially. He is establishing a quality criterion for prosperity. True blessing does not come with pain built in. What does that mean practically? There is a way of becoming wealthy that carries with it destruction disguised as prosperity. Broken relationships, sacrificed health, neglected family, compromised integrity, that is not blessing. That is wealth with embedded pain. And Solomon says that is not the standard of the Lord's blessing. And here is the fifth secret, the one that makes people most uncomfortable because it challenges in two directions at once. On one side, there are preachers, and the Philippines has many, who promise prosperity without character, who present material wealth as an automatic sign of divine favor, who do not say that hastily acquired wealth, Proverbs 20:21, will not be blessed in the end. Seed, offerings, covenant vows that guarantee financial breakthrough, specific amounts tied to specific blessings. These are not Solomon, these are not Proverbs. These are not the biblical economic system and the Filipino family that gives beyond what they can sustain because a preacher promised God would multiply it. That family is not acting in faith. That family is being exploited. On the other side, there is a tradition present in both Catholic and evangelical Filipino culture that teaches that material prosperity is always suspicious, that whoever has much probably didn't get there with integrity, that it is more spiritual to be poor than to be rich. Solomon dismantles both extremes. The criterion is not the amount. The criterion is the process. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth and does not add pain. The prosperity that comes from the honest path, from faithful work, from seed planted with consistency that is sustainable, clean, without the weight of guilt or hidden destruction. Proverbs 28:20 confirms it. A faithful person will be richly blessed, but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished. Eager to get rich, the one who shortcuts the process, the scheme, the fraud, the ethical bypass, produces wealth with pain. It is unstable, fragile, and eventually pays the price that was embedded from the beginning. In Makati, a small business owner named Dante had been running a logistics company for 8 years. A supplier offered him a significant discount in exchange for under-declaring the value of shipments, avoiding customs duties. The margin was attractive. Dante accepted. 14 months later, a BIR audit discovered the arrangement. The penalties exceeded 3 times what he had saved. The investigation lasted 2 years. The reputation he had spent 8 years building in his industry was damaged in ways that took 5 more years to repair. The wealth came with pain built in. Exactly what Solomon described. The reconstruction was possible, but it began with one decision: never again shorten the process. He would rather grow slowly with integrity than fast with consequence. The instruction map. First step, define your ethical lines before you need them. Most people only discover what they won't do when the temptation is already in front of them. Decide now, while everything is calm, where your line is. Second step, periodically evaluate whether the growth you are experiencing brings peace or anxiety. The blessing of the Lord does not add pain if growth is coming with destruction in some area. Relationships, health, children, integrity, something is wrong in the process. Third step, reject the ethical shortcut even when the cost seems small. The small shortcut builds the habit of shortcuts, and the habit of shortcuts scales with the size of the business. Fourth step, be discerning about prosperity gospel promises. If a preacher is telling you that giving a specific amount guarantees a specific financial return, that is not biblical stewardship. That is spiritual manipulation of people who are genuinely hoping for God's provision. Fifth step, build accountability. Have someone, your spouse, your pastor, a trusted mentor, who can freely question your financial decisions. Whoever is accountable to no one is vulnerable to their own rationalizations. We have reached the place where everything connects. 5 secrets that Solomon wrote thousands of years ago, and that remain true because they do not describe the market of one era. They describe human nature and the principles that God embedded in creation. Assets versus liabilities. Calculated risk versus paralysis disguised as faith. The difference between productive debt and consumer debt. Fair pricing as an act of worship. And prosperity with integrity as the only type of growth that does not come with pain built in. These principles were not hidden intentionally. They are in the Bible, open for anyone who reads, but they need to be read with eyes of application, not just devotion, and that is the invitation that remains here. This week, open Proverbs and Ecclesiastes with a notebook beside you. Write down every verse that speaks about money, work, business, inheritance, debt, price. You will find a financial manual that no modern course surpasses because it was written by the wisest man who ever lived, at the request of the God who designed the economy before any market system ever existed. If this opens something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A family member, a barkada, someone from your church community you have wanted to have this conversation with but never knew how to start. One share can be the beginning of a conversation that a family has been needing for years. Let me pray over you now. Father, thank you for the wisdom of Solomon, which survived 3,000 years because it does not describe a market. It describes principles you embedded in reality. Speak today to everyone watching this. To the one who has been living without a financial plan because they believed that planning was a lack of trust in you. Give them the discipline to sit down with their numbers this week. To the one who is trapped in cycles of consumer debt, give them the courage to see the real amount and the beginning of the path out. To the one who has never discussed money with their spouse or family, give them the courage to start that conversation this week. To the one who has been giving beyond what they can sustain because a preacher promised God would multiply it, give them discernment to know the difference between biblical generosity and spiritual exploitation. And to the one who has built their faith on a theology of money that does not hold up under the full reading of Scripture, give them the humility to re-examine, to correct, and to return to the Word without filters. May the families who watch this video be, 5 years from now, families whose children remember this as the moment when everything started to change. In Jesus' name, amen. Write in the comments, I choose the blessing that brings no pain with it, because that choice, made today, in the small things, in the everyday decisions, is the beginning of the system Solomon described, and that system works. It has worked for 3,000 years.